Well, welcome to the College Admission Lab from Khan Lab School. I'm Brennan Barnard, College Counseling Advisor at Khan Lab School, and I am joined today by our founder, Sal Khan, and Sal is also the founder and CEO of Khan Academy, Schoolhouse.World, and Khan World School. Welcome, Sal.
Good to be here, Brennan.
And our guest is Gary Clark, who's the Associate Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management at UCLA. Hi, Gary.
Hey, Brennan.
So this evening, Sal's going to once again take the host role as we discuss the landscape of college admission in 2026 and what colleges are looking for in and out of the classroom. And for those of you who are joining us, please share your questions in the chat and we'll get to as many as possible. Also, go in there now and just share where you're coming from and whether you're a student or parent or educator, just so we have a sense who the audience is. And Gary, before we turn it over to Sal, maybe you can just start by giving us a brief overview of your educational journey and your career journey, how you got to where you are.
Sure. Thanks again for inviting me. Looking forward to the conversation. I am happy to answer questions for all of you. Again, Gary Clark. I'm the, Associate Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management at UCLA. I've been here overall now going on 14 years. For 11 of those years, I was the Director of Undergraduate Admission before stepping into this role where I oversee all the work we do in undergraduate admission, financial aid and scholarships, and some of the early academic outreach programs that we have on our campus. Overall, been in college admissions for, I guess, about 28 years or so. I grew up in Virginia. I went to a public university in Virginia named Christopher Newport University. Was the first person in my family to earn a college degree and got very lucky and went to the perfect place for me and had a great experience and really look back fondly on that experience as kind of helping me to develop this desire to want to pull back the curtain and help students and families really understand the college admission process. So I kind of sought this out right after I graduated from college and worked briefly my alma mater and College of William and Mary before moving to California. Worked at Pitzer College, one of the Claremont colleges for a number of years, and then USC of all places for 7 years before coming over to UCLA. So that's a little bit about my journey.
Thanks. And so you have a bit of experience in a range of different schools, and one of the reasons we asked you to join us tonight, Gary, is because I've always appreciated how just kind of frank you are about the landscape and the process and the experience of applying to college. So we appreciate that.
Sure.
All right, Sal, I will turn it over to you to get started.
Sure. No, thanks, Brennan. And yeah, very helpful intro, Gary. Well, Gary, I think uh, I guess we'll get started. I mean, a lot of people are just curious about the process generally at universities generally. It's obviously some people very stressed. It sometimes feels like an opaque process. But as we know, and as you know better than I do, explain also how University of California works, how its processes may be different than typical processes. University of California, obviously some of the best state universities, some of the best universities, period, in the world. But it has a slightly different process. And then how is that different from campus? How is UCLA different than Berkeley versus UCSD, and how you're able to kind of glean what you think you need most from those applications?
Sure. So, short question that could have a long answer, but
Yeah,
I'm gonna try
that's
and
okay. But just
tighten it
talk as
up
long as you want. That's
in
every
some
question.
spaces where I can. So, the first thing I'll say, I'll throw a couple of kind of random ideas out there, and then I'll zoom in a bit on kind of UCLA and the UC system. The first thing I'll say is when you oftentimes questions around college admission need to be more specific because they're really about highly selective college admission.
Mhm.
The thing every speaking engagement I do that I utter this phrase at least one time is that selectivity is not a proxy for quality. I think one of the things that drives an enormous amount of the anxiety that comes in the college admission process is this idea that everything I'm working for is to get into this super highly selective institution. And as somebody who did not go to a highly selective institution, I believe there are a lot of phenomenal educational experiences out there for students that are at places that have a 40, 50, 60+% admit rate. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. That helps to bring down the temperature of a lot of these conversations if it's not just a list of schools that have single digit admit rates that you're applying to. But the process that we implement, that most often people are asking about is usually referred to as kind of a holistic admission process, meaning that it's not just numbers. It's usually a combination of quantitative and qualitative measures that lead a college or university to make an admission decision amongst usually a highly qualified applicant pool. So that certainly describes our process. But what goes into that process can be a little bit different, and I think that's part of what you were alluding to with the University of California. So couple of things, for example, we do not consider letters of recommendation. We do not interview students. And that's not because we don't like, wouldn't enjoy either of those things. But for my campus this past year, we received 146,000 first year applications and 30,000 transfer applications. So multiply a couple of letters of recommendation by that kind of volume, and you start to understand from a practical standpoint why that's not really just an option for us. But it's also because I think we're really focused in the application on giving all students kind of an equal opportunity to self-advocate for themselves in the application. And so what we're really focusing our attention on, the backbone of the application, without a doubt, the academic work. The rigor of the student's high school program, the grades that they've earned in those courses, whatever assessments might be available. We're trying to understand how the student performed in the context of the opportunities available to them in their school setting. So we're not just saying, well, like APs is always kind of the coin of the realm. Well, if you don't have X number of APs, you're not going to be admitted. Many high schools across the country, a growing number of high schools, are not utilizing an AP curriculum. And so what we're trying to understand is that contextual part of that evaluation of academic performance and understanding what that performance means in the context of the opportunities available in that school. The same kind of lens can be applied to what students are doing outside of class. We recognize that not all educational environments are the same. Not all students' personal situations are the same. And so there are different kinds of opportunities that might be available to students in different settings. Maybe they're doing a lot of school-related activities. Maybe they're working part-time or helping a family member at home or whatever the case may be. Those things are going to play a role in our process as well. And then, we collect what we call personal insight questions, which are kind of our version of the college essay. And this really just allows us to get to know the student a little bit. Again, no letters, no interviews. So, those really give us a chance to hear about the student from the student in their voice, which is incredibly powerful and helpful in helping us to understand who these individuals are going to be beyond just when they get admitted, but what kind of roommate are they going to be? What are they going to be like in our campus community? Those kinds of things are important to us as well. The last quick thing I'll say, and then I'll go back to your questions. The process, the criteria that are considered by the University of California campuses, there are 13 different comprehensive review criteria that have been approved by faculty for us to consider in the evaluation process. And any of you can just Google UC comprehensive review, and it'll be the first thing that comes up when you look for that. These are the things that faculty have said, yes, we want you to consider and evaluate these things in making admission decisions. We do not consider standardized testing. SAT or ACT are not considered at all. We are test free at the University of California system, so we don't consider that. But each of the individual campuses makes their own independent admission decisions. So if you fill out the UC application and you apply to multiple campuses, your decision at one campus doesn't have anything to do with your decision at another. We're all utilizing the same criteria, implementing holistic review in ways that may be slightly different from one campus to another. So the decisions aren't going to be uniform, but that also comes with the fact that we're not sharing that information. I don't have any knowledge of, nor do I care if you applied to one of the other campuses. All we care about is your fit with our campus.
That's super helpful. And just to kind of double click on that, and even some maybe misconceptions, or maybe they're accurate conceptions that I've heard even from families that are, especially out here in California. I think UCLA is at the top or near the top of everyone's lists out here. Um, when you don't have this traditional standardized tests, and you're leveraging grades, and it sounds like AP, and there's a question about, AP and maybe, dual enrollment, community college type classes. I literally have a family friend who was stressed because she had a teacher at her son's school, and he's, I think, a sophomore, and told him if he gets anything less than an A in this class, he is not going to UCLA or Berkeley. And so I want you to, it sounds like by your expression, that sounds like a misconception, but I can see how someone feels that way because you're not seeing the SAT or ACT. You have 100 and, depending on how you account for it, 40,000, 70,000 applicants for less than 10,000 spots. So yeah, what would you tell someone like that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so it's a question that we get a lot. And the reality is, of course, we don't just take students with 4.0s. But here is kind of a cold splash of water, as it relates to a question like that. So at UCLA, this past year, we had 33,000 students apply with a perfect unweighted 4.0 GPA. Last year, we admitted 13,000. So even if we only took students with a 4.0, we turn away 20,000 of them. And I say that not to scare people, and that's certainly not how we conduct this process. But I do say, going back to this highly selective nature of the conversation, what gets all the attention is the volume of applications. You hear that number, that's what sticks, that's what people talk about. What people don't think about sometimes is the very self-selective nature of the applicant pool. There aren't a lot of bad students applying to our campus. Like the best students at high schools throughout the state, around the country, around the world, are the students who are choosing to apply to UCLA and other highly selective colleges and universities. But if all we cared about was maximizing a GPA, we could fill our class with an Excel file in 30 minutes and save ourselves a lot of trouble. But that's not what we do. That's not going to yield the kind of class that we're looking to enroll. So we are looking at, the context, the educational access to educational opportunities. We by no means are just taking students with perfect 4.0 GPAs. You can find any number of different data sources that will confirm that. That's not the way that we do our work. But it is the case at any highly selective institution, the further you move away from some of those averages, the likelihood of being admitted goes down. So I don't want students to feel like, oh my God, if I get a B, all is lost. That's not the case at all. But it is almost just like going into a highly selective process with eyes wide open to say, look, I know regardless of how strong my credentials are, when you're applying to places with a single digit admit rate, it's a reach for everybody. There isn't any student I could meet that they could rattle things off and I could say, hey, yeah, you're in, because of just how self-selective and how competitive the applicant pool is. So I think in my mind, it comes down to really having a good list. It comes down to having a list that includes colleges and universities where you and your counselor feel confident that your chances of being admitted there are very good. And if you can have some schools like that on your list, you can really de-escalate this process quite a bit because highly selective institutions, I say all the time, sometimes selectivity is not a philosophy, it's just arithmetic.
Right.
The numerator is how many admission spaces we have, and there's a cap on those. The denominator is how many students applied. There's your admit rate.
And what would you say? And it makes all the sense in the world. And obviously, no one would expect if you got like a lot of B's or C's that you're going to be competitive with a lot of kids who are very close to straight A's. But you just said it. You're even if you only if you accepted people with straight A's, you'd still have to reject, two-thirds of them in that world. And so that goes into these other signals. And we'll focus. I want to get into the non-academic signals, but on the academic signals, you mentioned APs. Um, Brendan and I have always stressed it. You don't have to take all the APs in the world, but I am curious how y'all look at APs. And there's this question we also had about dual enrollment. Are they kind of viewed plus or minus the same
Mhm.
thing? It kind of, how are you thinking about this? And are there other things on the academic front that we haven't talked about outside of grades, dual enrollment, APs?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to kind of, if you want to just blanketly refer to it as rigor, and I know
Mhm.
we all sometimes have our issues with that term, but let's just use it for the purposes of illustration here. Like whatever kind of rigor is available to you in your school curriculum is fine by us. Like, so we're not expecting a student who goes to a school that doesn't offer APs to find a high school down the road where they can go take an AP exam. If dual enrollment is something that's commonly available in your school environment, great, go for it. If you want to take some community college classes while you're a high school student, great, go for it. If your school offers an IB curriculum, wonderful. AP, great. Like we don't value any one of those things over another. We just want to know, based on what's available to you in your school environment, that you're taking advantage of some of those classes. And that doesn't mean you're maxing out the curriculum. I mean, there are schools that offer 25, 30 plus APs. Like we're not expecting students to have nothing but APs in their high school program, but we do expect, if there are some available, we want to see that you're taking advantage of some of those, that you're pursuing rigor, in some academic areas that might be of interest to you. So I don't want students to feel like they have to that we value one kind of curriculum over another. I think we just want to really understand what's available to you in your school, and do we really feel like the student is making an effort to challenge themselves and take advantage of some of those more rigorous courses.
And I think sometimes students want to know if, or families just generally, if the same admission officer or same reader is looking at all the same applications from a given school.
It depends on the school. For us, that it is not the case.
Right.
So we have schools where we'll get 500 plus applicants from one school. So no, we don't. It's not the same person that's reading all the applications from a given school. But I will share, this is certainly true for us, and I think the UC is that every application is read at least twice before a decision is made. And those are two independent reviews. So if Brennan read the application first and said whatever he was, left his notes about the application. If I read it after him, I can't see how Brennan scored or evaluated the application. So it's two independent reviews of the application that ultimately lead to the student's overall kind of holistic review.
And a couple of questions coming in on this, I'm sure it's front of mind actually for both people in state and out of state, is how do y'all think about in state versus out of state, especially when you could fill up with kids from California
Mhm.
who are incredible alone?
Yeah, so we have a cap on the percentage of non-resident students that we can enroll at the undergraduate level at UC. So it's about an 18% cap for all of the campuses. When that cap was put into place, Berkeley and Merced, were slightly ahead of that cap. We were asked by the state to reduce our enrollment of non-resident students over the past several years, which we've done. At the same time, we've significantly increased enrollment of California residents during that period. So overall, for all intents and purposes, about an 18% cap on non-resident enrollment at the UC system.
I see.
But the process and what we're looking for is exactly the same. And there's actually something that the faculty implemented. This is going back to 2011 when the University of California first started increasing enrollment of non-resident students due to the budget crisis back in 2008, that the faculty implemented a policy called the Compare Favorably standard, which essentially means that we as a campus have to be able to share information that shows that the quality of students that we're admitting outside of California is as good or better than the quality of students that we're admitting in California. So it basically means you can't kind of have a mythical bar here for California residents, for non-residents, and then expect Californians to meet this higher bar. The non-resident students have to compare favorably with the quality of our California residents.
And would you say that, I mean, I know it's not a science here, but are the bars like roughly similar? Or would you say that, how do people think about that?
Well, they're very similar. I mean, I think the quality of students that we admit outside of California does compare favorably, but they're similar. I mean, and this is where, the data is just absurd. Like the average GPA for a California resident, I won't get this exactly right, so this is just for illustration, maybe a 3.9. The average admitted student GPA for a non-resident student's a 3.92. I mean, this is unweighted GPA. So, I mean, they're all so close to 4.0s that there's not this massive gap between one and the other. All of the students that we admit at UCLA are performing at an extraordinarily high level.
And that's based on a internally computed GPA.
Yes, it's based on the UC GPA is a
Right.
distinctive and formal thing that is based on sophomore and junior year grades. When the student inputs their academic history into the UC application, they tell us about all the classes and grades they've earned throughout high school, ninth grade through 12th grade, at least what they're scheduled to take in senior year. The UC GPA the UC application will calculate the UC GPA for the student. So they're not inputting a GPA. It's calculated by the application for all of the courses that the student reports in those 10th and 11th grade, the grades they earned, and whether those courses were honors bearing in any way.
Well, and there was a question earlier about students from religious schools who have a mandatory religion class. I mean, does that factor in, or just how do electives play? I think people often wonder, is it just the core courses, or how's that work?
No, they're elected. There's a formal thing with the University of California called the A through G requirements. One of those letters represents electives. So there certainly are opportunities for students to have those classes that impact their UC GPA. So the students will report all the classes that they've taken in high school. I mean, something like a yearbook class or something like that is not going to count towards a GPA, but academic courses are certainly going to count towards that GPA.
And moving from this kind of, let's call it academic part of the application to the less academic, you have the personal statements, you have the extracurriculars. There's a question about personal statements in the age of AI. I mean, I'm curious how you were already thinking about them. I'm curious actually if you've seen a change, more grammatical statements, et cetera, et cetera. Have you changed the statements themselves? What is ethical? How much help can someone get from a large language model, things like that? Why don't we start there? Why don't we start on the personal statement and then we can go into the other extracurriculars?
Sure. So the first thing for us is, to just make clear what ours are. So we have what we call personal insight questions. So there are 8 questions. Students choose 4 of them to respond to, no more than 350 words in each response. So the idea here is kind of get to the point. This is not an exercise in writing this long narrative. It's really about choosing the 4 questions that speak to you the most, and then giving us some real personal reflections and understanding of who you are as a person above and beyond the grades and activities and leadership and awards and things that we see outside of class. What we value in responses to those questions, and this is something I've said throughout my career at UCLA, and it hasn't changed with the advent of AI, is the fact that the word I can use to describe the best responses I've ever read is authentic. This is about the student sharing something with us that we otherwise wouldn't know. This is not an exercise in grading an English paper. That doesn't mean we don't want it to be well written, but we're not circling misplaced commas and correcting grammar in these responses. That's not the purpose of them. It's because we don't take letters and we don't, interview students. Like, this is the only chance we have to hear the student's voice in the application. And I think sometimes there's a perception that we value polish over content. And that's just not the reality. And so when it comes to using AI, I think AI can be helpful. And the UC even has a statement in the application when you're filling it out that kind of describes what we see as responsible use of AI to help you collect your ideas or start to shape what you might want to say. But the second that bleeds into it's an AI generated story and not your story, you've really taken a wrong turn. Because I can't tell you how many responses to those questions I've read over the years that are very well polished, incredible narrative. They tell us all about, grandma and the sacrifices that she made for the family. And at the end of it, it's like grandma sounds amazing. This was a very well written response that told me a lot about grandma and told me nothing about the student. So that's, I think, the increasing danger of AI is that you get something that looks really well written, but it doesn't have that kind of authentic heart and depth that we're really looking for out of these responses. So we don't bury our head in the sand and say thou shalt not use AI. We want students to use it appropriately, and we try and give some guidance in the application as to how best to do that.
Yeah, so I mean, my takeaways from that are, yeah, this isn't to measure how strong of a grammarian you are, or even how strong of a writer you are. Obviously, you need to be a functional writer. It's authentic, and what I read into authentic too. So many, I've seen a lot of applications that people have wanted my feedback on, and you could just tell someone is trying to sound like they think an admissions person wants them to
Right.
be. They're
Right.
using therefore, I mean, we all use
Hmm.
therefore in art, but like not in natural ways.
Right.
They're just sounding
Right.
like they're from writing from the 19th century, or they feel like they need to rehash their everything that's written everywhere. And as I mentioned, my research and blah blah blah. I
Hmm.
is that what you like? I actually it'd be
Yeah.
fun to hear. Like, what have you seen people do that kind of turned you off? Like, I mean, grandma's one example. Like they might have thought it was really good, and they might have even gotten feedback from people that it was good, but you're like, ooh, that one.
Yeah, I mean, and I think even before AI, I mean, I think it's always, a good exercise to give feedback, like you write something, hand it to a friend or a counselor or parent or, teacher or whatever, and get some feedback on it. But I think that can go too far where you get so much feedback and you make so many changes that you don't really recognize it anymore. Like it's become something that's this combination of advice from, 8 or 10 different people, none of whom really know how we look at this or not in most cases. So, I don't. I whenever I talk to students, like I don't say, well, don't write about this. Like it's not about, like students will say, well, I don't want to, I heard you shouldn't write the theater essay, like, because you gotta say it like everybody's writing about theater. And it's like, is that your thing? Like, is that what you love? Is that what you're excited about? Like if I see you writing about, some aspect of theater that really speaks to you, I'm probably going to see that come through in your writing. I want that. We don't expect 17 and 18-year-olds to all have these 146,000 unique and different experiences from every other person in the applicant pool. It's okay that you have some shared experiences. What makes it unique and distinctive is just the you in that experience that we really are trying to bring forward. So, I think it's just at the end of when you're done writing, do I recognize what I wrote? Do I feel like the person who read this knows more about me than they did, before they read the application? And then one little practical thing, like think of your application as a whole entity. They see my grades and my curriculum. They see all the things I'm engaged in outside of class and, or work or family or whatever. What don't they know about me? Help to kind of build this collective case. Like I can see your activities and how many years and how many hours you've dedicated to things. If you want to highlight one of those things, great. But I think sometimes students will use their personal insight questions as an opportunity to rehash 4 different aspects of their extracurricular activities that isn't really adding as much to the application. Help us know a little bit about who you are above and beyond those things.
Well, and I think that's what's unique about the PIQ, the personal insight questions, and what differs from kind of the typical college essay, right? Is that
Hmm.
you're asking really intentional questions, and students choose those questions, and they really need to answer those questions, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
not write kind of some flowery college essay that kind of is they
Right.
wax poetic, right?
Yeah.
You want
No.
to learn something about them, you want them to answer the question.
Exactly. If you start with, it was a dark and stormy night, you've probably already taken a wrong turn somewhere. So just kind of get to the heart of the matter, and that's really us knowing you a little bit better.
Yeah. No, and extending now, I mean, you touched on extracurriculars a little bit, but I mean, generally, I want to know how you think about that. And a kind of a double click on that is there's the types of extracurriculars that people think sound smart and intellectual. And I'm not saying that they're not or they're not great, but you could imagine the research stuff, the robotic stuff, and then there's stuff that could be great experience, working at a restaurant, whatever it might be. And sometimes the stereotype is, oh, well, if you live in a upper middle class, well-heeled place where you might have access to research or robotics, that's what you have to do. Like
Hmm.
you can't be the waiter or the waitress at yes, if you're in a community where you might not have access to that, then you might. How do you think about that? Especially even like opportunity. I hear socioeconomic or whatever opportunities you have, the most you use out of it, but is there a value judgment on like, okay, you come from a middle class, upper middle class, hey, you weren't on robotics, but you were how do y'all think about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way that I would answer that is to say that I've never I can't ever remember a time where I've looked at an application, regardless of where it was from, what school or what environment, and said, that activity is missing. Why don't I see that there? Why don't I see a summer trip abroad? providing service in some other part of the world? Why don't I see research listed anywhere? Like there's never this, like, I'm expecting this, and if you fall short of that, you've got to explain yourself. It's more of just what has the student chosen to do with their time outside of class, and what's meaningful to them. Are they going to come to our campus community and engage in our community in a similar way? And yes, I mean, opportunities can be different in one school setting or one student's personal situation versus another. But I think it's more of just us understanding what is it that's important to the student. Because here's the reality. And again, I'm talking from a highly selective kind of vantage point here. You can do all the quote unquote right things and still get denied. So rather than spending your time doing the things that you think colleges and universities want to see, do the things that are really meaningful to you. If doing research in some academic subject area is something that's exciting for you and is helping you to understand, is this really something that I want to study? Is this something I want to pursue further? Is this an issue in the world that I really care about? Great. Pour yourself into that. That's wonderful. But for the student who's sitting back thinking like, I hear you got to do research, so let me sit down and rack my brain and figure out what kind of research I might want to get connected to. That's not it. Like that's not what we're looking for. I think it's kind of student driven. It's like it's us knowing what does this student really care about. Are they going to be somebody the faculty are excited to teach in the classroom? Are they going to be somebody that's really going to take advantage of the opportunities outside of class? And I think excellence in leadership can present itself in a lot of different ways outside of just president of this or captain of that or having my name on a research paper. Like you can show intellectual curiosity and leadership and engagement in ways that go above and beyond what we see as these kind of traditional ways of doing that.
Can we kind of come full circle for a second? Because I really appreciated what you said at the beginning, Gary, about selectivity not being a proxy for quality. And a lot of juniors are out there, and some younger students are out there looking at colleges right now and trying to assess where they're going to apply, or seniors are getting their decisions back and trying to decide where they're going to enroll. So maybe I mean, maybe all three of us, or Gary, Sal, what indicators for quality would you recommend that families look for?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I mean, I think for me, I think it is important as you assess an institution. One of the most underutilized tools on any college campus, and this I'll sound old when I say this, and it'll sound absurd, but one of the least utilized tools that I think can be incredibly valuable to students and families is the college catalog. Like if you're thinking, if you especially if I have an idea of what I might be interested in studying, one of the ways that you can really distinguish one college or university from another is by looking at the classes offered in that subject area. Like look at the course descriptions, get a sense of what is this college's approach to biology versus this college's approach to biology. There's going to be a lot in common, but there are going to be some things that are a little bit different. So take advantage of that. I think visiting campuses certainly makes a big difference. And I would say one of the very thin silver linings that came from the pandemic was that colleges and universities had to really up their virtual game. You can engage now in a deeper way with colleges and universities that aren't in your backyard much more easily than you could 5 or 6 years ago. So take advantage of that, because again, especially when you're thinking about places that maybe aren't on the tip of your tongue or I don't know as much about them, taking advantage of that opportunity to do something virtually before you choose, if you can, to fly there and visit in person, I think is important. We talk a lot about, I often talk about like our retention, our 4-year graduation rates. I think that's important to understand about a college or university. How are they going to support you to not only persist and graduate, but to thrive? As an undergraduate, how do they help you transition into the university? What kind of support is available once you're there? Because look, regardless of how bright you are, college is hard. I mean, socially, academically, it's different than high school. Hopefully you come there with all the skills you need to be successful, but that doesn't mean you won't need some help along the way. So I think it's important to get a sense of what kind of support is in place at a college or university. And then just what do you look forward to? Like if school spirit is something that matters, then talk to students, like, get a sense of what that's like there. If research opportunities are important, like Google undergraduate research opportunities at that school. I think it's about things that sometimes aren't necessarily measured in some of the US news or guidebooks that sometimes can be pretty impactful in a student's choice.
Yeah, I'll just add, I'll add plus plus to that. Uh, Something that Brennan and I have told a lot of students is there's no right decision. You have to make the decision right. And one way I think about that is we could walk onto any respectable college campus. And when I say respectable, there's hundreds of them in the
Sure.
United States alone. Um, and I think it would take us about half an hour to find a student who hates it on that campus. And it would take us in that same half an hour, we'll find students who love it on that very same campus. And I think if you talk to the ones who hate it, they'll say, the people here are too competitive. No one's out here to help me. I can't get attention from the faculty. The cafeteria food's no good. They'll make a whole list. And if I talk to the person who loves it, they'll say the exact opposite. Man, the people here are so open. They're always smiling at me. When I talk to the professors, they're so happy that I went up to them and this and that. And it really is what they are putting out into the universe. Obviously, there can be exceptions to that. Sometimes the universe does happen to us, but I think many times we can happen to the universe. And I think that's especially true. I think there's hundreds of colleges campuses where they truly are going out of their way to make sure that you have a good experience. Now, it's not on them to do it though. It's on you. For you to put the
Absolutely.
smile on your face, for you to step out of your comfort zone, for you to say hi to the person that looks a little bit different than you. And even if they don't smile at you the first time, you keep doing it, I guarantee you it'll work. So that's my only take. And I remind folks, a lot of people have a perception, oh, I'm of this, whatever, whatever. I need to get, but no matter where you get into, you're going to go to a place where you're not going to be the smartest person and you're not going to be the least smart person. There's going to be other people and you're not going to be the coolest person and you're not going to be the least cool person. There's going to be other people like you and not like you in ways that are good for you. So you're going to be fine if you
Absolutely.
have the right mindset. I don't know,
I
Brennan,
agree.
anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think just, what's your ability to pivot once you're on campus, right? Like, one, I think, which kind of to reiterate what you're saying, Sal, is, how easy is it going to be for you to self-advocate once you're on this campus, right? How are you going to be able to make that experience yours? And then I think levels of student engagement, really trying to get a picture of that, see how engaged the students are. And then also I think experiential education, like how within certain majors, within certain courses, are you able to get hands-on experience that you can then take with you? And the pivot piece is just kind of, most college students change their major at least once, right? And so how flexible is the school in terms of allowing you to pursue your kind of your developing interests?
Yeah. All good questions.
Great. Well, thank everyone for joining and thank you, Gary and Brennan, for all your insights. We could talk for hours, but this is a good start.
Appreciate it. And we will be back again next month with another college admission lab. And again, yes, thank you, Gary, and thank you, Sal, and wishing everyone a good night.
Sounds good. Have a good night.
Bye
Take
now.
care.